Okay, so we've created our intervals. We've figured out how often, how many numbers fall into each interval, and we're ready to graph. Now let's make sure we understand what's going on here. So this is the number of children who visited the zoo over a 2-week period. So there's a data piece for each of the days over a 2-week period. And so we're going to put this together into a bar graph. And so we're going to call this number of children visiting the zoo over a 2-week period. Down here on our x-axis is going to be our number of children, and those will be our intervals. And then over here will be the frequency, how often each one of those intervals was hit. Okay, so we know that we need a 90 to 100. That'll be our first bar. We need a 101 to 111. That's our second bar. Our third bar is a 112 to 122, and I'm simply getting these numbers from up here. And then a 123 to 133, and a 134 to 144. We've got an extra grid there that we don't need. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm using these intervals that we created as our categories for our bars down here. So where if you had kind of surveyed people about maybe what color they liked, and you were making a bar graph out of that, and this might have been red and blue and orange and green and yellow, instead of these being words down here, these are the intervals that we created up on top. And now we're just going to graph the frequencies with which each of those intervals occurred. So in the 90 to 100 range, we had, let's make this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We had 3. And so we would draw in our bar for 3, and we would shade that in some way, just so that it's easier to see. And then in the 101 to 111 range, up at the top, our intervals for that, let me put this down so you can see that, was 2. We had 2 pieces of data that fell into the 101 to 111. And so we'll graph the 2. And then for the 112 to 122, we had 3 pieces of data in that one. And so we will graph this. And then for the 123 to 133, we had 4 pieces of data that fell in there. And finally, in the 134 to 144 range, we had 2 pieces of data. And so it's another way, another picture of what our data looks like. And again, this is a histogram. And one of the important elements of a histogram is that you graph it all in one area. It's all compact, the bars touch. And another important aspect of a histogram is that we've put our data into these categories of frequencies. We're using numbers as our categories down here as opposed to some kind of words that we often see on bar graphs. So that's how to make a frequency table and a histogram.